With trembling hands clutching a bankruptcy notice and her husband's death certificate, Eleanor Reed gazed up at the weathered facade of Hawthorne Funeral Home. She had spent her last $800 buying this abandoned property at a county auction, desperate for both a fresh start and a place to live after losing everything. Little did she know that behind the hidden panel in the old embalming room lay evidence from long-forgotten FBI cold cases, files that would not only reopen investigations into decades-old unsolved murders, but would thrust her into a dangerous game of cat and mouse between determined federal agents, corrupt local officials, and the real killers who had evaded justice for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late October rain pattered against the stained glass windows as Eleanor followed County Clerk Thomas Mercer up the cracked concrete steps of what was now her property. The imposing Victorian structure had once been the most prestigious funeral home in Riverview County, its ornate woodwork and solemn grandeur offering dignity to the departed and comfort to the grieving. Now, after sitting vacant for nearly a decade, it stood as a shadow of its former self, a monument to neglect and forgotten memories. Her sensible shoes echoed on the marble floor of the grand foyer, now dulled by years of abandonment. Cobwebs stretched between carved wooden columns, and the once immaculate viewing rooms were blanketed in a thick layer of dust, faded wallpaper, peeled in corners where water damage had taken its toll, and the lingering scent of chemical preservatives mingled with mustiness and decay. As I mentioned during the auction, the property is being sold as is, Thomas said, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. Hawthorne Funeral Home closed in 2014 after the last owner, old Gerald Hawthorne, passed away with no heirs. The county seized it for back taxes 5 years ago. Honestly, we're just happy someone's taking it off our hands. Eleanor nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. Just 8 months ago, she had been a successful art gallery owner in Chicago, married to investment banker Richard Reed. Then came the diagnosis, aggressive pancreatic cancer. Richard was gone within 3 months, leaving her to discover the mountain of hidden debt he'd accumulated through risky investments and gambling. The creditors had taken everything, their lakefront condo, her gallery, even her wedding ring. The location isn't terrible, Thomas continued, trying to sound encouraging. Downtown Riverview has seen better days, but there's talk of revitalization. The second floor has living quarters where the Hawthorns used to stay, might be habitable with some work. And the utilities? Eleanor asked, running her hand along a dusty wooden banister. Water and electric are still connected to the grid, though you'll need to set up accounts. The plumbing might need work. Building this old always does. He hesitated. Look, I know you got this place for a steal, but are you sure about this? A widow alone in an old funeral home. Eleanor straightened her back. I have a master's in fine arts restoration. Mr. Mercer, I've renovated historic buildings before, and after what I've been through this past year, an old funeral home doesn't scare me. This is what I can afford. What she didn't say was that her savings had been depleted by Richard's medical bills after their insurance had lapsed. The small town of Riverview, 3 hours from her former life in Chicago, offered the only housing she could afford. This forgotten building purchased for the price of 1 month's rent in her old neighborhood. Thomas handed her ring of brass. Keys, main entrance, back door, upstairs apartment, and these smaller ones for various storage rooms. The embalming room is in the basement, probably best to keep that locked. Some of the old equipment is still down there. Eleanor took the keys, her trained eye noticing the distinctive Victorian craftsmanship of the key ring. Thank you. I can manage from here. Take your time looking around. I have other appointments, so I'll head out. Town hall's open weekdays if you need anything. Thomas seemed relieved to leave, the emptiness of the building clearly making him uncomfortable. Alone in what would become both her home and her fresh start, Eleanor moved through the cavernous main floor like a curator examining a new exhibit. The viewing rooms with their faded velvet curtains, the small chapel with its wooden pews still in place, the consultation office with its heavy oak desk untouched by time. Her trained eyes saw past the decay to the building's bones, solid, dignified, built to last. The ornate ceiling medallions, the hand-carved moldings, the elaborate stained glass windows, all treasures waiting to be restored by someone who understood their value. She made her way upstairs to the Hawthorne family's former apartment, a surprisingly spacious 5-room residence with large windows overlooking Riverview's town square. The furniture was gone, but the fixtures remained, a clawfoot tub in the bathroom, a cast-iron sink in the kitchen, built-in bookcases in what had once been a study. With cleaning and minor repairs, it could be livable within days. As she stood by the window, watching rain trace patterns on the stained glass, Eleanor felt the weight of the past year pressing down on her. The diagnosis, Richard's rapid decline, the devastating discovery of their financial ruin, the humiliation of bankruptcy, the pitying looks from former friends as she sold off personal possessions just to survive. Her phone chimed with an incoming call. The screen showed Chicago Art Institute, her former employer. For a moment, hope fluttered in her chest, but she quickly suppressed it. They had made their position clear when her gallery had closed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor Reed speaking, she answered, keeping her voice professional. Eleanor, it's Margaret Donovan. The Art Institute director's voice was as crisp as ever. I'm just checking in. Simmons mentioned you'd left Chicago. Something about buying property in, where was it? Riverview, Eleanor replied. Yes, I've purchased a building here. I'm standing in it right now. Riverview? Isn't that where that dreadful murder spree happened in the 90s? What on earth possessed you to move there? Eleanor didn't mention that her bankruptcy, considered scandalous in Chicago's elite art circles, had effectively ended her professional prospects in the city. Margaret herself had suggested Eleanor take a prolonged sabbatical, rather than embarrass the Institute with her financial troubles. It's a change of pace, Eleanor said neutrally. The building has historical significance. Late Victorian architecture. Remarkably preserved. Well, Margaret's voice held a note of condescension. When you're ready to return to serious work, let me know. We could possibly find something for you in the educational department, more suitable for someone in your circumstances. After ending the call, Eleanor let out a long breath, fighting back tears that threatened to fall. From respected gallery owner and art restoration expert to relegated to children's tours, all because her husband had hidden their financial reality until it was too late. As the afternoon light began to fade, Eleanor made her way back downstairs. She hadn't yet explored the most intriguing and perhaps unsettling feature of her new property, the embalming room. Following the main hallway to the rear of the building, she found a narrow staircase leading to the basement level. The temperature dropped noticeably as she descended. Unlike the rest of the building, the basement showed no signs of water damage or significant deterioration. Its concrete walls and floors had been built to withstand the passage of time and the specific requirements of its solemn purpose. Eleanor flipped a light switch, surprised when fluorescent fixtures flickered to life overhead. The embalming room dominated the space, clinical and austere, its porcelain tables still in place, drains built into the slightly sloped floor. Stainless steel cabinets lined one wall, likely once containing chemicals and instruments of the mortician's trade. As a restoration expert specializing in historic buildings, Eleanor had seen many unusual spaces, but there was something uniquely sobering about standing in a room where thousands of deceased had been prepared for their final journeys. Not frightening exactly, but profoundly humbling. On the far wall, partially concealed behind a rolling storage cabinet, she noticed something unexpected, what appeared to be a door, its outline barely visible in the aging paint. Curious, she pushed the heavy cabinet aside, revealing a small, vault-like door with an old-fashioned combination lock. "Now that's interesting," she murmured, examining the lock. It appeared to be original to the building, suggesting this hidden vault had been part of the funeral home's design from the beginning. But why would a funeral home need a vault? Valuables removed from the deceased, perhaps. Or something else. Entirely? Eleanor checked her watch. Too late to do anything more today. She needed to bring her belongings from the motel, purchase cleaning supplies, and begin making the apartment habitable. The basement's mysteries would have to wait. That night, lying on an air mattress in what would become her bedroom, Eleanor scrolled through her phone, researching Hawthorne Funeral Home. Most articles focused on its long history in Riverview, spanning 4 generations of the Hawthorne family from its founding in 1892 until Gerald Hawthorne's death in 2014. One detail caught her attention. During the 1960s and 70s, the funeral home had been unofficially involved with several high-profile FBI investigations. Gerald Hawthorne's father, Edgar, had apparently been trusted local resource for federal agents investigating a series of unsolved murders in the region. FBI connections, Eleanor whispered to herself. Historical curiosity piqued. Could the vault in the basement be related to these investigations? If the vault had remained sealed since the funeral home's closure, might it still contain materials from that era? Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams vivid and unsettling, standing before the vault as its door slowly swung open, revealing shelves of dusty files and evidence bags marked with FBI seals. She woke at dawn, the dream so real she half expected to find case files clutched in her hands. After a simple breakfast, Eleanor drove to the local hardware store, purchasing cleaning supplies, basic tools, and a book on lockpicking. If the basement vault held historical artifacts related to federal investigations, her restoration training would be essential for their proper handling and preservation. The morning passed in a flurry of cleaning, sweeping decades of dust from the apartment, scrubbing fixtures, wiping windows to let in more light. By afternoon, exhausted but satisfied, Eleanor returned her attention to the basement vault. The book on lockpicking offered little help with a sophisticated combination lock, but it did explain the basic principles. This particular model would likely have a 3-number sequence, standard for the era of the building's construction. She tried several likely combinations with no success. Think historically, she told herself, applying her researcher's mindset. What combination might the Hawthornes have used? Birth dates of family members? The funeral home's establishment date? As she worked, an elderly woman appeared at the funeral home's front door, peering through the glass. Eleanor opened it cautiously. "Can I help you?" she asked. The woman smiled warmly, her face a map of wrinkles. "Name's Dorothy Wilkins. Heard someone finally bought the old Hawthorne place. Thought I'd welcome you to Riverview." Eleanor introduced herself, instinctively, liking the old woman's genuine manner. "I worked here, you know," Dorothy said, gazing around the foyer with misty eyes. 38 years as Gerald's assistant. Started just after the Jenkins murders in '63. Those were dark days for Riverview. "The Jenkins murders?" Eleanor asked, excitement rising. The case had been mentioned in her research. Dorothy nodded. "Family of 4, all killed in their beds. Father, mother, 2 children. Never solved officially, though everyone had their suspicions. First of 7 similar cases over the next decade. The FBI practically lived in this building during those years. Because of Edgar Hawthorne's cooperation? Edgar was more than cooperative." Dorothy lowered her voice. "His brother was an FBI agent. They used the funeral home as an unofficial field office when they needed to work away from prying eyes. especially after locals started suspecting the sheriff's department might be involved. This revelation sent Eleanor's mind racing. "Mrs. Wilkins, there's a vault in the basement embalming room. Would you know anything about it?" Dorothy's eyes widened. "You found that old thing?" Edgar called it his truth box. Said it contained things too dangerous to keep in plain sight, but too important to destroy. "I never knew what was inside. Only the Hawthorns had the combination. The vault is still locked. I have the key to the room, but not the combination." Dorothy frowned, thinking. Well, for the embalming room, Gerald always used his father's birth year as the key code, minus 1921. But the vault? That would have been something more significant. Eleanor's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of historical detail she needed. "Would you mind if I tried some combinations while you're here? Maybe you'll remember something that helps." Together, they moved to the basement. Dorothy visibly shuddered as they entered the embalming room. Never did like coming down here, even after all those years. Too many souls passed through this room. Eleanor examined the combination lock more carefully in Dorothy's presence. "It's a 3-number sequence, most likely. Any idea what Edgar might have used?" Edgar was obsessed with dates and numbers, Dorothy recalled. The Jenkins family was killed on November 12, 1963, minus 11 minus 12 minus 63. That date changed everything for Riverview and for Edgar. Eleanor turned the dial carefully. 11 left, 12 right, 63 left. She held her breath and pulled the handle. Nothing happened. "Worth a try," Dorothy sighed. Edgar must have used something else. As Dorothy prepared to leave, she paused thoughtfully. "You know, there was something odd after the Jenkins case." Edgar became fixated on finding the killer. Started keeping his own files, separate from the FBI investigation. Became convinced that someone powerful was obstructing justice. This piqued Eleanor's professional interest. "What kind of files?" "Interviews, evidence notes, photographs the FBI wouldn't include in the official record." Edgar believed the Jenkins murders and the ones that followed were connected to influential people in Riverview, people above suspicion, but he could never prove it. After Dorothy left, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the vault and Edgar Hawthorne's unofficial investigation. If Edgar had indeed kept hidden files on murders that were never solved, those documents could be of significant historical value and potentially explosive if they implicated people who had escaped justice. That evening, as rain once again battered the windows, Eleanor researched the Jenkins murders and the subsequent killings that had terrorized Riverview in the 1960s and 70s. News articles described brutal home invasions targeting families, always with the same pattern: parents and children killed in their beds, no signs of forced entry, small personal items taken as souvenirs. The FBI had pursued numerous leads but had never made an arrest. The case had gone cold in 1978 when the killings suddenly stopped. One detail stood out. The lead FBI agent assigned to the case was William Hawthorne, Edgar's brother. This family connection explained the funeral home's involvement, but also raised questions. Had the Hawthorne brothers discovered something they couldn't safely reveal? Something now locked in the basement vault? Could it be that simple? Eleanor murmured. Moving back to the vault, she tried a new combination, the badge number of William Hawthorne, which she had found mentioned in an article about the FBI's investigation, 7-2-9. The mechanism remained unyielding. Frustrated but not defeated, Eleanor spent the next day settling into her new home. A local second-hand store provided basic furniture, a real bed, a table, chairs. She met several neighbors, all curious about the widow who had bought the old funeral home. "Place is probably haunted by all those murder victims," commented one elderly man at the grocery store, eyeing Eleanor with concern. "Not sure I'd want to live there alone." Returning to the funeral home that afternoon, Eleanor was surprised to find a sleek black car parked outside. A man in an expensive suit stood at the entrance, checking his watch impatiently. "Ms. Reed," he called as she approached. "I'm Victor Chambers, representing Riverview Heritage Development. I understand you've recently acquired this property." Eleanor nodded cautiously, unlocking the door. "Just 3 days ago." Chambers followed her inside without waiting for an invitation. "Our company specializes in redeveloping historic properties in small towns. We've had our eye on this building for some time, but missed the auction notice. I'm authorized to offer you $50,000, a substantial profit on your investment." The offer was tempting, enough to rent a decent apartment for a year and provide a financial cushion while she sought work. But something felt off about Chambers' eagerness. "I'm not interested in selling," Eleanor said firmly. "I've just moved in." Chambers' smile tightened. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. This building requires significant renovation to be commercially viable. The cost would far exceed what a—" His eyes flicked to her simple clothing. "Person in your situation could manage. Our offer is quite generous. Nevertheless, I decline." Chambers reached into his jacket and produced a business card. "Think it over. Our offer expires in 48 hours. After that, we'll be pursuing other opportunities in Riverview." After he left, Eleanor examined his card. Riverview Heritage Development had a Chicago address, a connection that seemed unlikely to be coincidental. Why would a Chicago developer be interested in an abandoned funeral home in a struggling small town 3 hours away? What had changed to make this property suddenly valuable? That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor returned to the basement vault. Something about Chambers' visit had unsettled her. If the building itself was valuable to developers, why had it sat empty for nearly a decade? What had changed? On impulse, she tried another combination. The date the funeral home had closed, March 5, 1014. The dial turned smoothly, 3 right, 15 left, 14 right. When she pulled the handle, something inside the mechanism shifted. The small door, silent for years, groaned as if awakening from a long sleep. Eleanor's heart pounded as she pulled harder. Slowly, the vault door swung open. The smell hit her first: musty paper, old leather, metal. Her conservator's instincts registered the odor of materials long sealed away from light and modern air. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw shelves lining the small vault, filled with file folders, evidence bags, and notebooks. And in the center, on a small table, sat a single metal container marked with faded FBI insignia and a simple label: "Jenkins Family Homicides, Confidential." Eleanor's hands trembled as she approached it. The Jenkins murders, the first in the series of unsolved killings that had terrorized Riverview. As a historian of art and architecture, she understood the potential significance of her discovery. If these were Edgar Hawthorne's unofficial files on the case, they could contain information never included in the official investigation, possibly even evidence identifying the killer who had evaded justice for decades. Carefully, using the conservation techniques ingrained from years of training, Eleanor opened the metal container. Inside were dozens of folders containing typewritten reports, handwritten notes, and photographs too disturbing to study for long. Crime scene images showing the brutality of the murders. One document caught her eye: a list of suspects stamped confidential and dated December 1963. Unlike the official suspects mentioned in newspaper accounts, this list included names she recognized from her research, prominent Riverview citizens, including the mayor and police chief at the time. "My God," Eleanor whispered, understanding the implications. Edgar Hawthorne had suspected local officials of involvement in the murders, perhaps explaining why the cases were never solved. As she carefully examined the documents, a folded paper fell from between 2 folders. Unlike the official FBI documents, This appeared to be a personal letter handwritten on ordinary paper. It was dated July 28, 1978, the month after the last murder in the series. "Dear Gerald," it began. "With the death of Agent Peterson, the Jenkins investigation is officially closed. The Bureau has ordered all files returned to Quantico, but I cannot in good conscience surrender the evidence we've gathered implicating Judge Garrison and his hunting club. Peterson died believing we were close to proving their involvement in all 7 family murders. His accident only confirms our suspicions." The letter continued. "As discussed, these documents must remain sealed. The evidence is compelling, but circumstantial, and Garrison's influence extends to the highest levels of state government. Perhaps in 30 years, when his protections have faded, the truth can emerge. Until then, I trust your vault and your discretion. Uncle William." Eleanor sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. FBI agent William Hawthorne had deliberately preserved evidence against a sitting judge, hiding it in his brother's funeral home when the official investigation was shut down, perhaps after the suspicious death of another agent. And somehow, these files had remained sealed away, forgotten after Edgar and William's deaths, undisturbed during the funeral home's final years until Gerald Hawthorne's death led to its closure. The question that burned in Eleanor's mind: what had happened to Judge Garrison and the others implicated in these documents? As if in answer, she found a newspaper clipping dated 2018. Former Riverview Judge Harold Garrison dies at 93. The obituary described him as a pillar of the community, who had served 3 decades on the bench before retiring to Florida in 1998. It mentioned his founding of the Riverview Sportsman's Club in 1960, likely the hunting club referenced in William's letter. More importantly, it listed his only surviving family member, grandson Victor Garrison, who had returned to Riverview in 2018 to continue his grandfather's legacy of community development. The pieces began to fall into place. Victor Chambers was likely Victor Garrison, using his mother's maiden name while representing Riverview Heritage Development, a company suddenly interested in acquiring the funeral home where evidence of his grandfather's crimes might be hidden. Eleanor's protective instinct surged within her. These documents represented crucial evidence in unsolved murders, families who had never received justice because powerful men had obstructed the investigation and silenced those who got too close to the truth. These files didn't belong hidden away or destroyed to protect reputations. They belonged in the hands of justice. As she carefully returned the documents to their container, Eleanor heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The main door of the funeral home opening. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer, approaching the stairs to the basement. Eleanor froze, her mind racing. It was nearly midnight. No legitimate visitor would arrive unannounced. Quickly, she closed the metal document case and looked for a place to hide it. The vault had a small floor safe embedded in one corner, likely used for valuables when the funeral home was operational. She carefully placed the case inside, closed it, then moved to the embalming room door. Through the partially open door, she could see 2 men descending the stairs. One was Victor Chambers, his expensive suit now replaced with dark practical clothing. The other was a stranger, older, military-bearing, expression grim. "I'm telling you, Judge, someone's opened the vault," Chambers was saying. "The security firm monitoring the building registered movement in this section an hour ago." "Then where are the files?" the older man demanded. "You assured me they'd be here undisturbed." "No one knows what they are," Chambers insisted. "Even if this woman found them, she wouldn't understand their significance." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. They knew exactly what the vault contained and had been monitoring the building, waiting for someone to solve the puzzle they couldn't. Now they wanted to ensure whatever was found remained buried forever. Making a split-second decision, Eleanor quietly closed the embalming room door from inside, turning the key in the lock. The solid click echoed in the confined space. Outside, she heard Chambers' startled exclamation. "The embalming room, it's locked." Footsteps rushed toward the door, followed by the handle turning vigorously. "We need the key," the judge barked. "I have a master set," Chambers replied. "But it will take time to find the right one." Eleanor assessed her situation. The embalming room was secure for the moment, but had only one exit. Her phone showed no signal in the basement's thick walls. However, as a historical conservator, she knew that buildings of this era often had multiple access points for practical purposes. Scanning the room carefully, she noticed a small service door near the floor in one corner, partially hidden by a supply cabinet. It would likely lead to the original coal chute or utility access. She moved the cabinet aside, revealing a door just large enough for a person to crawl through. The rusted hinges protested as she pulled it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that appeared to lead toward the back of the property. Outside the embalming room door, she could hear Chambers trying various keys, getting closer to finding the right one. Eleanor grabbed her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the passage. Decades of cobwebs hung from the low ceiling, but the tunnel itself seemed structurally sound. With no other choice, she crawled inside, pulling the small door closed. Behind her, the passage was tight and dusty, clearly unused for many years. Eleanor moved as quickly as she could, ignoring the spiderwebs that clung to her hair and clothing. Behind her, she heard the embalming room door open, followed by Chambers' curse when he discovered she wasn't inside. The tunnel extended about 30 feet before ending at another small door. Eleanor pushed it open cautiously, emerging into an overgrown area behind the funeral home near an old storage shed. From this hidden position, she could see Chambers and the man he'd called Judge exiting the main building, flashlights sweeping the property as they searched for her. Eleanor remained motionless, barely breathing as they passed within feet of her hiding place. Their voices carried clearly in the night air. "She must have found another way out," Chambers said, frustration evident in his tone. "Find her," the older man ordered. "And the files. If what my grandfather feared is in that vault, we can't let it resurface now. I've worked too hard rebuilding the garrison name in this town." "What about the development project? We need this property." "The development is just a cover," Judge Garrison snapped. "My grandfather warned me on his deathbed that the evidence still existed somewhere in the Hawthorne building. With the old man dead, I thought it was safe, but clearly we need to be more thorough." Eleanor waited until they moved toward the street before slipping away in the opposite direction. With no safe way to return to her apartment and her car parked conspicuously out front, she needed another option. Dorothy Wilkins had mentioned living just 2 blocks away on Maple Street. Moving through backyards and staying in shadows, Eleanor made her way to Dorothy's small bungalow. The lights were still on despite the late hour, and Dorothy answered her gentle knock with surprising alertness. "My goodness, child, what's happened to you?" she exclaimed, taking in Eleanor's disheveled appearance. "I found what was in the vault," Eleanor explained quickly. "And now the people who want to keep it hidden are after me." Dorothy ushered her inside without hesitation, locking the door and drawing the curtains. "Tell me everything." As Eleanor recounted her discovery and the confrontation that followed, Dorothy's expression grew increasingly grave. When Eleanor mentioned the name Garrison, the older woman's face paled. "Harold Garrison," Dorothy whispered. "Edgar suspected him all along. Said the Jenkins family had evidence of corruption involving the judge and his friends. That's why they were killed. His grandson is trying to get the funeral home now," Eleanor said. Calling himself Chambers, Dorothy nodded grimly. "Victor Garrison returned about a year after his grandfather died. Been buying up properties all over town. Got himself appointed to the planning commission. Everyone thinks he's the town's savior, bringing in development money. "We need to get those files to the authorities," Eleanor said. "But who can we trust? If what I read is true, the Garrisons had influence in local law enforcement." Dorothy thought for a moment. Sheriff Carson retired last year. The new sheriff, Lisa Montgomery, came from the state police. No connections to old Riverview families. If anyone would handle this properly. "It's her. Can you call her? I left my phone in the embalming room when I escaped." Dorothy reached for her landline, but before she could dial, headlights swept across the front window. A car was pulling into her driveway. "Were you followed?" Dorothy asked sharply. "I don't think so." Eleanor moved to peek through the curtains. "It's a police cruiser." Dorothy's relief was palpable. "That's my grandson Michael. He's a deputy. Works the night shift." The young officer who entered moments later bore a striking resemblance to Dorothy, though his expression was all business until he recognized Eleanor. "Ms. Reed, what are you doing here?" he asked, confusion evident. "She's in trouble, Michael," Dorothy explained. "Found some old evidence in the Hawthorne vault. Evidence about the Jenkins murders." Michael's professional demeanor instantly intensified. "The Jenkins case? That's been cold for nearly 50 years. "Not cold," Eleanor said. "Buried. By Judge Garrison and whoever else was involved." Michael's face hardened. "Garrison's grandson is on the county commission now. Been pushing hard to revitalize downtown, starting with tearing down the old funeral home." "We need to speak with Sheriff Montgomery," Eleanor said. "But Victor Garrison and someone he called Judge are looking for me." "That would be Malcolm Garrison, Harold's son," Michael clarified. "State appellate court judge now. Visits from the Capitol once a month." He reached for his radio. "I'll contact the sheriff directly. In the meantime, you're staying here where it's safe." As Michael stepped outside to make the call, Dorothy squeezed Eleanor's hand. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, dear. The Garrisons have been Riverview royalty for generations. No one's ever stood up to them and won." "I'm not trying to win," Eleanor replied. "I just want the truth to come out. 7 families deserve justice, even after all these years." "When?" Michael returned. His expression was grim. "Sheriff's on her way. Says to stay put and touch nothing until she arrives." He hesitated. "There's something else. Judge Malcolm Garrison called in a disturbance complaint at the funeral home 20 minutes ago. Claimed a trespasser broke in. 2 patrol units responded." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "They're trying to get back into the vault while making it look legitimate." Michael nodded. "I bet on it. But here's the thing. Sheriff Montgomery is handling this personally. Wouldn't let the regular patrols secure the scene. She's been looking into cold cases since she took office last year." For the first time since discovering the vault, Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the truth about the Jenkins murders and the others that followed would finally emerge after decades of deliberate concealment. As they waited for the sheriff, Dorothy prepared tea, her hands slightly trembling as she set cups on the table. "I always wondered why Edgar was so secretive about certain cases," she mused. "He'd spend hours in that basement, refusing to let anyone else handle particular remains. Saw he owed it to them to be thorough. He was collecting evidence." Eleanor realized. Using his position as funeral director to document details the official investigation might miss or ignore. Michael leaned forward intently. "If what you found is legitimate evidence connecting the Garrisons to these murders, it explains a lot about Riverview's history, how the family maintained control for so long. Why no one ever challenged them. Fear is a powerful motivator," Dorothy said quietly, "especially when 7 families were slaughtered with no apparent reason." The conversation halted at the sound of another vehicle pulling up. Through the window, they could see a sheriff's department SUV with lights flashing, but no siren. A tall woman in uniform approached the door with purposeful strides. "Sheriff." Lisa Montgomery was younger than Eleanor had expected. perhaps early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing as she entered the room. She nodded to Michael before turning her attention to Eleanor. "Ms. Reed, I understand you found something significant at the Hawthorne property," she said without preamble. Eleanor explained her discovery in detail: the vault, the FBI files, William Hawthorne's letter implicating Judge Harold Garrison and his hunting club in multiple homicides, and the current efforts by Garrison's son and grandson to recover or destroy the evidence. The sheriff listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When Eleanor finished, Montgomery's expression was grave but determined. "I've secured the funeral home," she said. "2 of my most trusted deputies are guarding the basement. No one's getting into that vault without my authorization." She fixed Eleanor with a direct gaze. "But we need to move quickly. Judge Malcolm Garrison has considerable influence. He's already called the state attorney general, claiming this is a matter of historical property rights belonging to his family." "The files don't belong to the Garrisons," Eleanor said firmly. "They belong to justice, to the families who never got closure because powerful men obstructed the investigation." Sheriff Montgomery nodded. "My thoughts exactly. I need you to take me to the vault. Show me exactly what you found, where it was positioned, everything. We need to document this discovery properly before anyone can interfere." Michael stepped forward. "I'll escort you both. The Garrisons won't be expecting her to return so soon, especially with law enforcement." As they prepared to leave, Dorothy took Eleanor's hands in her own. "Edgar would be grateful to you," she said softly. "He died believing the truth would never come out, that those families would never get justice." Eleanor squeezed the older woman's hands. The truth was just waiting for the right time, for someone who understood its value. Outside, the night had cleared, stars visible above Riverview's quiet streets. As Sheriff Montgomery's vehicle moved toward downtown, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. In just 4 days, her life had transformed from a desperate search for affordable housing to being at the center of a decades-old murder investigation. She had come to Riverview seeking only shelter, a place to rebuild her shattered life after losing everything. Instead, she had discovered a truth long buried, one that might finally bring justice to victims silenced decades ago, and expose the corrupt foundation upon which a powerful family had built their legacy. The funeral home loomed ahead, its Victorian silhouette stark against the night sky. Police vehicles surrounded the property, their lights casting alternating patterns of red and blue across the ornate facade. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. Some buildings held more than architectural history within their walls. Some held secrets that demanded to be revealed, no matter how long they had waited in darkness. For Eleanor Reed, the journey that had begun in bankruptcy and grief had led to an unexpected purpose, becoming the voice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. As Eleanor stepped from Sheriff Montgomery's vehicle, her eyes locked on the funeral home's silhouette against the night sky. The building that had represented her last chance at a fresh start now stood at the center of a half-century-old murder. Investigation. Yellow police tape cordoned off the entrance while uniformed deputies secured the perimeter, their flashlight beams cutting through darkness that seemed to hold more than just shadows. "2 of my deputies are inside," Sheriff Montgomery explained, guiding Eleanor toward the entrance. "I've told them to secure the basement, but touch nothing until we arrive." Deputy Michael Wilkins flanked Eleanor's other side, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "The Garrisons have friends throughout the county," he warned. "Word travels fast in Riverview." The funeral home's interior felt different under the harsh beams of police flashlights, less a historical treasure and more a crime scene. Their footsteps echoed across the marble floor as they moved toward the basement. Stairs. Eleanor's heart pounded with each step downward, the temperature dropping as they descended into the space where she had made her discovery. 2 deputies stood at attention outside the embalming room, nodding respectfully as Sheriff Montgomery approached. "Any disturbances?" Montgomery asked. The funeral home she had purchased as shelter had become the epicenter of a truth too long buried. As she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment. The financial ruin that had seemed like the end of her life had instead directed her to Riverview, to the Hawthorne Funeral Home, to a vault containing truth that had waited patiently for decades to be discovered. Perhaps, she thought as consciousness faded, there was a pattern in what had initially appeared to be random devastation. Perhaps her greatest loss had positioned her for her most important discovery, the bankruptcy that had stripped away her former life had led her precisely where she needed to be, to a small town with big secrets, to a forgotten vault containing evidence that would change lives and bring long-delayed justice to families who had never received closure. Eleanor Reed had come to Riverview seeking only shelter. She had found purpose instead. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, momentarily disoriented by the hotel room's bland comfort. The events of the previous day crashed back into her consciousness, the vault, the documents, the hasty escape from Riverview with evidence that had remained hidden for nearly 50 years. A soft knock at the door revealed Agent Lawson, already dressed in a crisp suit, despite the early hour. "Good morning, Ms. Reed. There have been developments overnight that you should be aware of." Over coffee in the hotel restaurant, Lawson outlined what had transpired while Eleanor slept. The Bureau had assembled a specialized cold case team, working through the night to process and analyze Edgar Hawthorne's meticulously preserved evidence. Simultaneously, investigators had begun discreetly contacting surviving relatives of the murder victims, preparing them for news that cases long considered unsolvable might finally be resolved. "The response has been overwhelming," Lawson said, sliding a tablet across the table to show Eleanor a photograph. "This is Anna Jenkins. She was 6 years old when her grandparents and aunt's family were killed. She was supposed to be staying with them that weekend, but had strep throat, so she stayed home with her parents instead." The woman in the photograph was in her 60s now, her eyes carrying the weight of a lifetime spent wondering why her family had been murdered. Eleanor felt a profound connection to this stranger who had lived under the shadow of unanswered questions for decades. "She's flying in today," Lawson continued, along with representatives from 5 of the other families. "They want to see the evidence for themselves, to understand what really happened after all these years." "And the Garrisons?" Eleanor asked. Lawson's expression hardened. "Judge Malcolm Garrison filed emergency motions in 3 different courts overnight, attempting to block our investigation and claim ownership of the materials from the vault." Victor Garrison held a press conference in Riverview, calling this a politically motivated attack on a respected family, and claiming the documents were fabricated. "That was fast," Eleanor observed. "They're running scared," Lawson replied. "For the first time in 50 years, they don't control the narrative. Which brings me to the reason I'm here so early. We need to get back to Riverview immediately. Our forensic team believes there may be additional evidence hidden in the funeral home." The drive back to Riverview felt different in daylight. Eleanor watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to rolling countryside, small towns appearing and disappearing as they traveled. Sheriff Montgomery followed in a separate vehicle, coordinating with her deputies by phone to ensure the funeral home remained secure. Edgar Hawthorne's journals mention a secondary storage location, Agent Lawson explained as they drove. Somewhere he considered even safer than the vault. "Based on his cryptic references, our team believes it might be hidden somewhere in the main structure of the building." Eleanor considered this. "The funeral home has been renovated several times over the years. There could be sealed spaces between walls, under floors." "Exactly," Lawson nodded. "And as the current owner with restoration experience, you're uniquely positioned to help us locate it." As they approached Riverview, Eleanor noticed increased activity in the small town, news vans parked in the square, reporters interviewing. Locals, curious onlookers, gathered in small groups discussing the sudden spotlight on their community. The story was breaking faster than anyone had anticipated. The funeral home itself was cordoned off with police tape, deputies stationed at all entrances. Across the street, a small group of protesters held signs supporting the Garrison family and condemning the investigation as a witch hunt. Eleanor recognized several prominent business owners among them, people whose livelihoods likely depended on Garrison development projects. Inside, the building had been transformed into an active investigation hub. Bureau technicians carefully examined every inch of the structure, using ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden spaces within walls and under floors. The basement vault remained open, its contents now properly documented and mostly removed to secure evidence storage. Dorothy Wilkins had arrived shortly after Eleanor, her intimate knowledge of the building's history proving invaluable to investigators. Now in her 80s, Dorothy moved through the funeral home with surprising energy, pointing out renovations and alterations made over the decades. Gerald remodeled the main viewing room in 1985, she explained, tapping a wall that sounded slightly hollow. Edgar was very specific about how it should be done, insisted on overseeing the work himself even though he was retired by then. Agent Lawson signaled to a technician who began scanning the wall with specialized equipment. Interesting. Why would Edgar be so concerned about a simple renovation? Edgar was particular about everything, Dorothy smiled fondly, but especially about preserving the building's historical elements. He always said this place held more history than people realized. The technician looked up from his equipment. There's definitely something behind this wall. A space approximately 2 feet deep running the length of the room. What followed was a carefully executed excavation, bureau technicians cutting a precise opening in the plaster to reveal what lay behind. As the section of wall was removed, Eleanor gasped at what was revealed, a narrow chamber lined with metal shelving, containing dozens of carefully preserved evidence containers, each labeled with dates corresponding to the murders. "It's a shadow evidence room," Agent Lawson whispered, awe evident in her voice. Edgar created his own secure storage for evidence he recovered from the victims, evidence that never made it into the official investigation. The containers held items that sent chills down Eleanor's spine: blood-stained clothing cut from victims, personal effects that should have been logged as evidence but mysteriously disappeared, shell casings that matched no weapon ever tested in the official investigation. Most significantly, there were journals, 7 identical leather-bound books, one apparently taken from each crime scene. "The missing journals," Lawson said, carefully examining one with gloved hands. Every family had one according to initial reports, but they were never entered into evidence. Edgar must have recovered them during the funeral preparations. The journal entries painted a damning picture. Each family had been documenting financial irregularities, suspicious activities, or outright crimes committed by members of Riverview's elite, all connected to Judge Harold Garrison and his inner circle. The Jenkins family had discovered embezzlement at the bank. The Millers had evidence of bribery in county construction contracts. The Prestons had photographs of prominent citizens at a location described as the Hunting Lodge, with young women who appeared to be held against their will. This wasn't just about silencing whistleblowers. Eleanor realized, the horror of the situation sinking in. These families were murdered to cover up a network of crimes, embezzlement, corruption, and possibly human trafficking. All protected by Judge Garrison's position and influence, Lawson added. The perfect cover. Who would investigate a respected judge and his prominent friends? As they cataloged the hidden evidence, Sheriff Montgomery received an urgent call from her office. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she listened. "Victor Garrison was just found dead at the family's Echo Lake property," she announced after ending the call. "Apparent suicide." Left a note claiming sole responsibility for protecting the family legacy. and denying his father or grandfather's involvement in any wrongdoing. Agent Lawson's eyes narrowed. Convenient, too convenient. My deputies are securing the scene. But Judge Garrison arrived with his private security team before they could complete their initial assessment. They're claiming jurisdiction based on it being private property. The implications were clear. The Garrisons were already constructing their narrative, sacrificing Victor as the scapegoat to protect the family name and legacy. The timing was suspicious at best, suggesting a desperate attempt to control a story rapidly spinning beyond their reach. I need to get to Echo Lake, Montgomery said. If they're tampering with evidence at the death scene, go, Lawson agreed. My team will continue here. We have more than enough to proceed regardless of what happens with Victor's death. As Montgomery departed, Eleanor found herself drawn to a small wooden box tucked behind the evidence containers, different from the others, more personal in nature. Inside were photographs of Edgar and William Hawthorne as young men, letters between the brothers, and a handwritten journal with entries spanning decades. The journal revealed the personal cost of the brothers' secret investigation. Edgar's wife had left him in 1967, unable to understand his obsession with the murder cases. William had been passed over for promotion repeatedly, his career stalling as he continued to quietly pursue the Jenkins investigation against his superior's orders. Both men had sacrificed everything: family, career advancement, personal happiness, to preserve evidence they believed would someday bring justice to the murdered families. They never gave up, Eleanor said softly, showing the journal to Lawson, even when it cost them everything. Some truths are worth any price, Lawson replied, her expression solemn. They understood that the evidence they were protecting wasn't just about solving murders. It was about exposing the corruption at the heart of Riverview, about breaking the power of men who believed themselves above the law. By mid-afternoon, the Bureau's evidence recovery team had documented and secured the contents of the hidden chamber. News of Victor Garrison's death had broken nationally, with conflicting reports about whether it was suicide or murder. Judge Malcolm Garrison had appeared briefly before cameras, expressing shock at his son's death and denying any family involvement in the historical murders being investigated. Eleanor watched the press conference on a tablet, noting the judge's practiced delivery and carefully constructed statements. This was a man accustomed to controlling narratives, to being believed simply because of his position and family name. But the evidence from the funeral home told a different story, one of multi-generational corruption and brutal silencing of anyone who threatened to expose the truth. He's good, Agent Lawson observed. Sympathetic, dignified, appropriately distressed. If we didn't have the evidence, people would believe him, Eleanor finished, just as they have for decades. The power of position and reputation, Lawson nodded. It's why these cases went unsolved for so long. Who would believe that a respected judge and his prominent friends were behind such brutal killings? Sheriff Montgomery returned from Echo Lake, her expression thunderous. The scene was contaminated before my deputies could secure it properly. Judge Garrison's security team had full access for at least 20 minutes before law enforcement arrived. Destroying evidence? Lawson asked. Or planting it? Montgomery replied. Either way, Victor's death investigation is already compromised. His body's being transported to the state medical examiner's office, but I'd be surprised if we get a conclusive determination. The pattern was becoming clear. The Garrisons were attempting to contain the damage by offering Victor as the sacrificial lamb, constructing a narrative where the grandson alone had taken extreme measures to protect the family legacy, while the patriarch and his son remained innocent of wrongdoing. As evening approached, Eleanor found herself standing in what had once been the funeral home's chapel, a quiet space untouched by the bustling investigation. The stained glass windows caught the setting sun, casting colored light across pews, where generations of Riverview citizens had mourned their loved ones, including, perhaps, some who had known the truth about the Jenkins murders, but remained silent out of fear. Dorothy found her there, the older woman's face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with purpose. "Agent Lawson told me what you found in Edgar's hidden room. All these years he was keeping those secrets right under our noses. He preserved the truth when everyone else wanted it buried," Eleanor replied. "He and William both sacrificed everything to ensure these families would someday get justice." Dorothy nodded, settling into a pew beside Eleanor. "I always wondered why Edgar never remarried after Helen left. Why he became so solitary in his later years. Now I understand. He was carrying a burden too heavy to share. A burden that's finally being lifted," Eleanor said. "Because of what you helped me discover." "No, dear," Dorothy patted Eleanor's hand. "Because you came to Riverview when you did. Because you had the courage to keep looking when others would have walked away. Edgar always said the truth would find its moment. You were meant to be here, to find what he left behind." The idea struck Eleanor with unexpected force that her path to Riverview, seemingly driven by financial desperation and personal tragedy, might have had greater purpose. The bankruptcy that had stripped away her former life had led her to this precise place at this precise moment in history, positioning her to uncover truth that had waited patiently for decades to be revealed. Their conversation was interrupted by Agent Lawson, who entered the chapel with a tablet in hand. "The first DNA results are back from the evidence Edgar preserved," she announced. "Modern technology applied to 50-year-old samples. It's remarkable what's possible now that wasn't when these crimes occurred." The results confirmed what the documentary evidence had suggested. Multiple DNA profiles recovered from items in Edgar's hidden room matched members of Judge Harold Garrison's Sportsman's Club, directly connecting them to murder scenes where they had claimed never to have been present. "This is definitive," Lawson said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "After 50 years, we can prove who was actually present at these crime scenes. Not just Harold Garrison, but 7 other prominent men whose names appear in Edgar's records. Are any still alive?" Eleanor asked. 3, including Judge Malcolm Garrison. His DNA shows a familial match to samples from 2 of the crime scenes. Not a direct match, but close enough to indicate his father was present. The implications were staggering. Not only could the original murders be solved, but the subsequent cover-up, potentially involving the current Judge Garrison, could be exposed and prosecuted. The carefully constructed Garrison legacy, built on murder and maintained through intimidation, was crumbling under the weight of evidence preserved by 2 brothers who had never stopped believing in justice. As night fell over Riverview, the funeral home became the centerpiece of a media frenzy. News vans lined the street, reporters broadcasting live updates about the Riverview murder files and the shocking connections to the prominent Garrison family. The small town that had harbored dark secrets for generations was now exposed in the harsh glare of national attention. Eleanor watched from an upstairs window as the scene unfolded below. In just 1 week, her life had transformed completely. She had come to Riverview as a bankrupt widow seeking affordable housing, her future uncertain, her prospects limited by financial ruin. Now she stood at the center of what was rapidly becoming one of the most significant cold case breakthroughs in recent history. Agent Lawson joined her at the window, her face illuminated by the flashing lights of news cameras below. The bureau director called personally. "This investigation is now a national priority. We're bringing in additional resources, establishing a dedicated task force." "Because of the Garrison connection?" "Partly," Lawson nodded. "But also because the evidence suggests these killings may connect to similar unsolved cases in neighboring counties." Edgar's notes reference other families who asked too many questions and were silenced in the same time period. This could be bigger than just Riverview. The possibility was both horrifying and compelling that the brutal efficiency of the Riverview murders might have inspired similar acts elsewhere, or perhaps been inspired by them. That the corruption centered around Judge Harold Garrison might extend beyond county lines, connecting powerful figures across the region in a network of crime and concealment. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "Arrest warrants are being prepared for Judge Malcolm Garrison and the 2 other surviving members of the Sportsman's Club. The state attorney general is personally reviewing the case to ensure everything is handled properly. There will be no mistakes, no technicalities that allow them to escape justice." Lawson paused, studying Eleanor with newfound respect. "None of this would have happened without you. Your decision to buy this building, your curiosity about the vault, your courage in protecting the evidence when the Garrisons came for it. You've changed the course of history for these families." Eleanor hadn't thought of it that way. She had been focused on survival, on finding affordable shelter after losing everything. The funeral home had been a desperate last resort, not a deliberate choice to uncover long-buried secrets. "I was just trying to start over," she said quietly. "To find a place where I could rebuild after losing everything." "Sometimes our lowest moments lead us exactly where we need to be," Lawson replied. "Your bankruptcy and loss brought you to Riverview at precisely the moment when those files needed to be found, after Gerald Hawthorne's death, but before the building could be demolished by the Garrisons." The observation resonated deeply with Eleanor. Throughout her life she had sought control and stability in her career, her marriage, her financial planning. The bankruptcy that followed Richard's death had seemed like the ultimate failure, a complete loss of the security she had worked so hard to build. Yet that very loss had propelled her to Riverview, to the county auction, to the funeral home, where evidence had waited patiently for decades to be discovered. Had her life proceeded according to plan, had Richard lived, had their finances remained stable, she would never have found herself in position to uncover the truth about the Jenkins murders. Edgar and William spent their lives protecting these files, Eleanor reflected, sacrificing their own happiness to ensure the truth would someday come to light. They never knew if their efforts would matter in the end. "That's the nature of faith," Dorothy said, joining them at the window. "Not religious faith, necessarily, but faith in justice. Faith that doing the right thing matters, even when results aren't guaranteed." Edgar and William believed that truth would eventually find its moment, and you were the moment it was waiting for. As the 3 women watched the scene below, a convoy of official vehicles pulled up in front of the funeral home. Agents and FBI windbreakers emerged, followed by officials from the state attorney general's office. Among them was a distinguished woman in her 60s, Anna Jenkins, the girl whose strep throat had saved her from being present during her family's murder 50 years earlier. "She asked to see the building," Lawson explained. "To stand in the place where the truth about her family's murder was preserved all these years." Eleanor felt a profound connection to this woman who had lived her entire adult life under the shadow of unanswered questions. Without exchanging a word, she understood Anna's need to see where Edgar Hawthorne had kept faith with her family, preserving evidence when official channels had failed. "I'll meet her," Eleanor decided. She should know the whole story, not just about the evidence, but about the men who protected it. About Edgar and William Hawthorne, who never forgot what happened to her family. As Eleanor descended the stairs to greet Anna Jenkins, she felt a sense of purpose unlike anything she had experienced before. The funeral home that had been her last resort, her desperate attempt at finding affordable housing, had become something far more significant, a place of reckoning, of long-delayed justice, of truth finally emerging after decades in darkness. Eleanor Reed had come to Riverview seeking only shelter. She had found meaning instead. 3 months after the discovery in the Hawthorne Funeral Home vault, Eleanor Reed stood in the grand hall of the State Justice Building, watching as the Attorney General addressed a room packed with journalists, family members of victims, and government officials. The investigation that had begun in a small-town funeral home had expanded into one of the most significant cold case breakthroughs in state history. Today, we announce indictments against Judge Malcolm Garrison and 2 other surviving members of what they called the Sportsman's Club, the Attorney General declared, her voice steady and resolute. These indictments cover 7 family murders committed between 1963 and 1978, as well as conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and corruption charges spanning more than 5 decades. Eleanor felt Anna Jenkins squeeze her hand as the formal announcement continued. Over the past months, they had formed a bond that transcended ordinary friendship, the finder of truth and the woman who had waited a lifetime to receive it, united by their shared commitment to justice long delayed. We also acknowledge that these indictments would not have been possible without the extraordinary efforts of 2 brothers, Edgar and William Hawthorne, who preserved critical evidence at great personal cost when official channels failed. Their dedication to truth, and Ms. Eleanor Reed's discovery of their carefully hidden files, has finally given these families the answers they have sought for generations. The press conference continued with technical details of the investigation. But Eleanor found her mind drifting to the remarkable journey of the past 3 months. What had begun with her desperate purchase of an abandoned funeral home had evolved into something far more profound, a reckoning with buried secrets, a challenge to generational power, and ultimately, a restoration of justice too long denied. The weeks following her discovery had been a whirlwind of activity. As the state investigation expanded, the hidden evidence from the funeral home had revealed connections to other unsolved cases across 3 counties, all bearing similar patterns, all somehow linked to Judge Harold Garrison and his influential friends. The Sportsman's Club had not been merely a social gathering of Riverview's elite. It had been a criminal enterprise operating behind a veneer of respectability. More disturbing still were the journals Eleanor had found hidden in Edgar Hawthorne's secret room, detailed accounts from victims who had documented corruption, embezzlement, and even human trafficking before they were silenced. The Preston family's photographs of young women at the Garrison hunting lodge had led investigators to uncover decades of exploitation protected by the judge's influence. For Eleanor personally, the aftermath had brought unexpected purpose. Her background in art restoration and historical preservation had made her an invaluable consultant to the investigation, helping analysts understand and interpret Edgar's meticulous documentation system. What had begun as a professional courtesy had evolved into a formal position with the state's cold case unit, applying her expertise to preserving and analyzing historical evidence and other long unsolved crimes. The funeral home itself had transformed as well. Rather than the burden she had initially feared, the building had become both her home and the centerpiece of her new life. With the investigation bringing national attention to Riverview, grants and donations had poured in to restore the historic structure, not just as a residence, but as a memorial to the victims and a testament to the power of truth preserved. Against overwhelming odds, Anna Jenkins' voice pulled her back to the present moment. They're asking for us. The Attorney General was inviting representatives of the victims' families to join her at the podium, with Eleanor included, as the discoverer of the evidence. As she moved forward through the crowd, Eleanor caught sight of her reflection in a polished marble column, a woman transformed from the desperate, bankrupt widow who had arrived in Riverview just months earlier. Gone was the uncertainty that had clouded her features after Richard's death and the subsequent financial collapse. In its place was something new, purpose, resolve, and a quiet confidence born from having faced down one of the most powerful families in the state and emerged victorious. At the podium, Anna spoke briefly but powerfully about living 50 years with unanswered questions about her family's murder. Other representatives shared similar stories, lives shaped by violence and the maddening knowledge that justice had been deliberately obstructed by those sworn to uphold the law. When Eleanor's turn came, She spoke not about herself, but about Edgar and William Hawthorne, two brothers who had sacrificed everything to preserve evidence they believed would someday matter. They never knew if their efforts would bear fruit. She said, her voice steady despite the bank of cameras before her. They simply did what was right, day after day, year after year, protecting truth at great personal cost. Their faith in justice sustained them when results seemed impossible. She paused, looking out at the assembled families. In an age of instant gratification, their patience and perseverance stand as a powerful reminder that some truths take time to emerge. That justice, while sometimes delayed, need not be permanently denied if good people refuse to surrender to intimidation and power. After the formal proceedings concluded, Eleanor found herself surrounded by family members of victims, each wanting to share their stories and express gratitude for her role in bringing long-awaited answers. An elderly man gripped her hand with surprising strength, tears streaming down his weathered face. "My brother was the Preston boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 12 years old when they killed him along with his parents and sister. For 50 years, I've lived with people whispering that my family must have done something to deserve. What happened to them? Now everyone knows the truth, that they died because my father was brave enough to document what he saw at that hunting lodge. Stories like his were repeated throughout the afternoon. Lives forever altered by violence, then compounded by whispers, suspicion, and the helpless knowledge that the killers were protected by wealth and influence. The relief of vindication, of truth finally acknowledged, was palpable in every conversation. Agent Lawson found Eleanor as the crowd began to disperse. "The bureau director wants to speak with you," she said, guiding Eleanor toward a private conference room. About the next phase. The next phase had been the subject of intense discussion over recent weeks. The evidence from the funeral home had opened doors to cold cases far beyond the original 7 family murders. Edgar Hawthorne's meticulous documentation had revealed patterns connecting unsolved crimes across decades, suggesting a network of corruption and violence that extended far beyond Riverview. The FBI director, a no-nonsense woman with decades of experience, got straight to the point. "Ms. Reed, your work with our cold case team has been exemplary. Your background in historical preservation provides a perspective our traditional investigators lack. We'd like to formalize your position with a special appointment focusing specifically on evidence recovery and analysis in cases older than 25 years. The offer was unexpected but compelling, a chance to apply her restoration expertise to other long-dormant cases, helping to uncover truths that had remained hidden for decades. It wasn't the life Eleanor had planned before Richard's death and the bankruptcy, but it resonated with the person she had become through her experience in Riverview. "I'd be honored," she replied, "but I want to maintain my residence in the funeral home. That building deserves to be preserved, not just for its historical significance, but for what it represents, the power of ordinary people to protect truth even against overwhelming odds." The director nodded approvingly. "Actually, we were hoping you'd say that. We envisioned the Hawthorne building becoming a satellite office for cold case work, a place where historical evidence can be properly preserved and analyzed. Your restoration work on the structure could serve as a model for similar projects nationwide." As Eleanor left the Justice Building that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across the capital city. Agent Lawson walked beside her, both women quiet as they processed the day's events and their implications. "It's remarkable," Lawson finally said. 3 months ago, you were a bankrupt widow buying an abandoned funeral home because it was all you could afford. Now you're at the center of what will likely be remembered as one of the most significant cold case breakthroughs in state history. Eleanor smiled, thinking of the strange path that had led her to this moment. Life rarely follows the plans we make. Sometimes our greatest setbacks lead us precisely where we need to be. "Edgar Hawthorne would be pleased," Lawson observed. Not just that the evidence was found, but that his building will continue serving the cause of justice. That feels right somehow. That night, returning to Riverview, Eleanor found the small town transformed by the day's announcements. The indictments against Judge Malcolm Garrison and his associates had dominated local news, forcing the community to confront uncomfortable truths about its history and the powerful family that had shaped it for generations. The funeral home, once an object of curiosity and sometimes derision, now stood as a symbol of justice long delayed but finally delivered. Someone had placed flowers on the front steps, a simple tribute to the brothers who had preserved truth, when others sought to bury it. Dorothy Wilkins waited on the porch, her face alight with a mixture of vindication and sorrow. "I just heard the news on television," she said as Eleanor approached. "All those years working alongside Edgar, I never knew what he was carrying, what he and William were protecting." "They couldn't risk telling anyone," Eleanor replied, unlocking the door and welcoming Dorothy inside. "Not when the Garrisons had such power, not when the stakes were so high." The interior of the funeral home had undergone remarkable transformation in 3 months. With grants from historical preservation societies and support from the state's victim advocacy program, the building was being carefully restored to its original grandeur while being adapted for its new purpose as both Eleanor's residence and a working center for cold case research. The main viewing room, where Edgar had hidden his evidence behind a false wall, now served as a conference space where investigators could review historical materials. The chapel remained a place of reflection, but now honored the victims of the 7 family murders with tasteful memorials designed in collaboration with surviving relatives. Upstairs, Eleanor had created a comfortable home in the former Hawthorne family apartment, blending period details with modern comforts. The embalming room and vault, where her discovery had begun, were preserved exactly as she had found them, serving as a powerful reminder of how truth had been protected when official channels failed. "I never imagined this place could become something so meaningful," Dorothy mused, settling into a chair in Eleanor's living room. "When Gerald died and the building sat empty, I thought it would eventually be demolished. Another piece of Riverview's history lost. Instead, it's become a place where history is preserved and examined," Eleanor said, "where old injustices can finally be addressed." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Michael Wilkins, Dorothy's grandson, now promoted to detective after his role in the initial investigation. "Evening, ladies," he greeted them. "Thought you'd want to know. They've taken Judge Garrison into custody. No special treatment, despite his attempts to claim medical exemptions. He's being processed like any other murder suspect." The news sent a ripple of satisfaction through the room. Malcolm Garrison had fought the indictments vigorously, using every legal maneuver and political connection to avoid accountability. His arrest represented a significant milestone, proof that even the most powerful could ultimately face justice for their crimes. "What about the Echo Lake property?" Eleanor asked. The Garrison family's hunting lodge had become a secondary focus of the investigation after evidence suggested it had been the site of multiple crimes beyond the family murders. "Sealed as a crime scene," Michael confirmed. "Forensic teams have been working the grounds for weeks. They found, well, let's just say the judge and his friends have a lot to answer for beyond the 7 families we already knew about." The implications were sobering, that the scope of the Garrison's crimes might extend far beyond what had initially been discovered. That Edgar and William Hawthorne's preserved evidence had opened doors to a deeper web of corruption and violence spanning generations. As Michael shared updates on the investigation, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the remarkable chain of events that had brought her to this moment. The devastating loss of her husband, the shocking discovery of their financial ruin, the desperate purchase of an abandoned funeral home in a town where she knew no one. Each painful step, events that had seemed like failures and setbacks at the time, had positioned her precisely where she needed to be to uncover truth that had waited decades to be revealed. Had any single element been different, had she found another housing option, had she ignored the vault, had she lacked the courage to stand against the garrisons, justice might never have come for the murdered families. Later that evening, after Dorothy and Michael had departed, Eleanor sat alone in what had once been Gerald Hawthorne's office, reviewing a leather-bound journal that had belonged to Edgar. His precise handwriting filled pages with observations about the Jenkins case and the others that followed, not just evidence, but his personal struggle with knowledge he could share with no one. One entry from 1972 stood out. Another anniversary of the Jenkins murders today. 9 years since that terrible night, and still no justice. William says the Bureau has officially archived the case, though they use the term ongoing investigation, to avoid admitting defeat. Only we know how thoroughly Garrison has buried the truth. Sometimes I wonder if our efforts will ever matter, if these files I've preserved will ever see the light of day. Faith without evidence is hard to maintain. Year after year, Eleanor felt a profound connection to the man who had written those words, a man who had persevered despite having no guarantee his actions would ever make a difference. Edgar Hawthorne had continued preserving evidence, documenting connections, protecting truth long after others had surrendered to the seeming inevitability of the garrison's power. His patient faith had finally been rewarded, though he hadn't lived to see it. The truth he and William had protected had emerged at last, bringing answers to families who had waited lifetime for justice. The powerful who had believed themselves untouchable were facing consequences decades in the making. As morning light filtered through the restored stained glass windows, Eleanor prepared for another day of work with the cold case team. The funeral home, once a symbol of death and grief, now bustled with purposeful activity as investigators, analysts, and family representatives collaborated to reconstruct events long buried. Anna Jenkins had become a regular presence, her quiet strength and determination inspiring everyone involved in the investigation. Now retired from a career in education, she had dedicated herself to supporting other families affected by unsolved crimes, creating a network of mutual aid and advocacy that extended far beyond the original 7 families. "I brought coffee," Anna announced, arriving with a tray of cups from Riverview's recently opened cafe, one of several new businesses that had appeared as the town experienced unexpected renewal. The national attention brought by the case had transformed Riverview from a struggling rural community into a place of historical interest, drawing visitors, researchers, and media from across the country. "Perfect timing," Eleanor welcomed her friend. "The team from the State Archives is arriving this morning to help us organize Edgar's documentation system." His cataloging method was remarkably sophisticated for someone with no formal training in evidence preservation. As they settled into work, Eleanor marveled at how naturally she had adapted to this new role, applying her restoration expertise not to artwork or architecture, but to evidence that could resolve long-abandoned searches for justice. The skills she had developed throughout her career had found unexpected application, bringing meaning to professional knowledge that had seemed irrelevant after bankruptcy forced the closure of her gallery. By mid-morning, the funeral home hummed with collaborative energy. In the main conference room, family representatives worked alongside investigators to identify connections between cases. In what had once been the chapel, archivists carefully preserved and digitized Edgar's meticulously maintained records. Throughout the building, experts in various fields contributed specialized knowledge to a justice effort 50 years in the making. A call from Agent Lawson brought momentous news. Malcolm Garrison had offered to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for consideration during sentencing. The judge, facing overwhelming evidence and abandoned by former allies, had begun providing information about crimes that extended far beyond the original 7 family murders. "He's implicated 12 other prominent individuals," Lawson reported. including 2 sitting state officials and a federal judge. This is expanding beyond anything we anticipated. The revelation confirmed what Edgar Hawthorne had suspected decades earlier, that the corruption centered around the Garrison family extended far beyond Riverview, connecting powerful figures across the region in a network of mutual protection and shared culpability. The Sportsman's Club had been merely the visible portion of a deeper system that had operated with impunity for generations. As Eleanor shared this update with the team, she noticed something remarkable in the faces around her, not just satisfaction at Garrison's cooperation, but a profound sense of vindication. For the family members who had spent decades being told their loved ones' cases were unsolvable, for the retired officers who had hit bureaucratic walls when investigating the original crimes, for everyone who had ever suspected the truth but lacked the evidence to prove it, this moment represented something beyond ordinary justice. It was restoration in its truest sense, not just of buildings or artifacts, but of truth itself, of faith in the possibility that no power, however entrenched, could permanently suppress what was right if enough people refused to surrender to intimidation and influence. That evening, as sunset painted Riverview's town square in golden light, Eleanor stood on the funeral home's front porch, watching the community that had become her home. Children played in the recently renovated gazebo, while elderly residents occupied newly installed benches. Shops that had been boarded up months earlier now displayed open signs and fresh paint. The town was healing, not just from the recent revelations about its darkest chapter, but from decades of suppressed truth that had silently corroded its foundations. By confronting the Garrison family's crimes, Riverview had begun reclaiming its identity from the powerful few who had controlled its narrative for generations. Dorothy joined Eleanor on the porch, her weathered hands cradling a cup of tea. "Gerald would be proud of what this place has become," she said, gazing at the building that had been her workplace for nearly 4 decades. "Edgar and William, too. They protected the truth when no one else would, and now look what's happened because of their faith." Eleanor nodded, thinking of the brothers who had sacrificed so much without knowing if their efforts would ever matter. They understood something essential, that truth has value even when its victory isn't guaranteed. That preserving evidence of injustice is worthwhile even without certainty that justice will ultimately prevail. "A lesson for all of us," Dorothy agreed, "especially in times when power seems insurmountable." As darkness fell over Riverview, lights illuminated the funeral home's stained glass windows from within, casting colorful patterns across the front lawn. The building that had once represented Eleanor's financial rock bottom had transformed into something she could never have imagined: a center for historical justice, a monument to perseverance, and most unexpectedly, a true home. The bankruptcy that had seemed like the end of her life had instead been a beginning. The desperate purchase that had represented her last financial resort had become the foundation of profound purpose. The abandoned funeral home that had offered merely affordable shelter had revealed its true value in the vault where truth had waited patiently for decades to be discovered. Eleanor Reed had come to Riverview seeking only a roof over her head. After losing everything, what she had found instead was immeasurably more valuable, not just answers to long-buried crimes, but a community restored, families vindicated, and a personal calling that transcended her former ambitions. Some buildings held more than architectural history within their walls. Some held truths that could transform lives when finally revealed. For Eleanor, the journey that had begun in grief and financial ruin had led to an unexpected legacy, becoming the voice for those who could no longer speak for themselves, and the keeper of a place where justice, though long delayed, had finally prevailed. As stars appeared in the clear night sky, Eleanor thought of Edgar Hawthorne's journal entry, questioning if his efforts would ever matter. If he could see the funeral home now, alive with purpose, filled with people committed to uncovering truth, a beacon of hope for families who had waited generations for answers, he would know with certainty that his faith had not been in vain. Some discoveries change more than history. Some transform the discoverer, the community, and the very nature of what justice means in a world where power too often prevails. The abandoned funeral home and its hidden vault had offered precisely such a discovery, a reminder that no truth, however deeply buried, is beyond reaching when the right person arrives at the right moment to uncover what others have fought to conceal. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.